Whether you're married or single or poly or ace, or hanging out with swingers back at your place, listen to us as we give no fuck on Tinder and Bumble and plenty of yuck, trying and having no luck, because we all know dating kinda sucks. Sarah and Adam are two of a kind. He says stupid shit and she doesn't mind. They're not doing this show to make any buck. Life as a chicken whose feathers they pluck. Why does it work? Well, here is the crux. They both know dating kinda sucks. Dating kinda sucks.
Hi, I'm Adam Heath Avitable, and I'm going solo this week on Dating Kinda Sucks, a podcast about dating, sex, and relationships. This week, I'll be talking about how to be a better man. Enjoy the show. If you're watching on YouTube, enjoy. It's just me today, so go ahead and like, subscribe, hit all the notifications, and hopefully learn something. I guess we shall see. Well, here I am. This is a one-man show today because my co-host Sarah is in Guatemala, and this will be a little bit of a different type of episode because it's just me. And she left me the virtual keys to the studio, and so I decided to take over. And of course, because I decided to do this, the episode is late, and I apologize for that. But this episode is going to be all about how to be a better man. That's what we're going to focus on, and maybe this will be an episode that you'll share with that shitty human being in your life who doesn't know how to be a better person. I don't know. We're just going to have some fun with it. I told Sarah that I was going to do a quick episode. I'd be like, yeah, I think I'm going to do an episode while you're gone. She's like, yeah, like a little 30-minute rant or something. I was like, yeah. So then I started working on the agenda, and the agenda is 3.5 pages long. So we're going to get into this pretty quickly. And I hope that everyone seems to enjoy it. This is not going to be, like I said, normal in any way. And I'm just going to talk and talk and talk and talk. But hopefully I make some good points that you appreciate. A little bit of housekeeping. First of all, that I want to give a big thanks out to Daniel Samuelson, who just joined our Patreon. And we always appreciate our Patreon supporters. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/DKS podcast for $5 a month, which, we can put a little bit of bonus content on there, but it just helps us maintain the podcast as well. So, if you're enjoying this, then at any point, please feel free to join our Patreon. And I want to give a shout out to our new listeners in Uruguay, Trinidad and Tobago, and Lebanon, who have recently caused Dating Kinda Sucks to hit the charts in some capacity there, which is pretty fantastic. We always like seeing that. So I really want to give just a huge shout out to our international audience writ large. And finally, I just want to give a quick reminder that we have our DKS hotline, and you can call with any questions about sex, dating, relationships, anything like that. And feel free to just let us have any questions. Give us a little bit of information about yourself so we know who to thank for leaving a message, and then we'll pick the best and we'll put them on our episodes. And it's kind of a neat way to get some feedback from our audience and also maybe help somebody. So don't be too scared. I know it's a little weird to call and just leave a random voicemail, but we'd love to hear from you if you have any types of questions at all. And so please give us a call at 407-519-0181. So that's 407-519-0181. And we will take your questions and see if we can provide you with some answers. I am currently outside Dallas, Texas. I'm recording this on the day that I probably will be trying to release this on Saturday. No, today's Friday, June 3rd. Hey, look, I remember what day it is. Imagine that. Friday, June 3rd. I'm going to try to get it out tonight. It might be tomorrow. But so if you're listening to this, you listen to it. As soon as I finished it, I was trying to get it edited. And by edited, I mean this is going to be raw as fuck. Like, I am just going to post this up there. The video on YouTube, I'm sure, is going to be completely unedited. And the only editing I'm going to do for the podcast itself is anything if there's any pauses, if I need to go back and change anything I said, if I fuck anything up, or just to put in the music. So it's going to be very, very different from our normal episodes where Sarah has control. And who knows, this might be the end of Dating Kinda Sucks, because there's a good chance she'll just murder me after this, which is usually what she wants to do whenever I've done a solo episode, which has only happened once before. and she was not very happy with me. But I have her blessing. I have her permission. I wouldn't do it otherwise. I can promise you that. I want to go get right into the topic, and we're not going to talk anything more about me and my life, anything that's going on here. It's just going to dive right into the topic. We're going to save all the going on in the lives of Sarah and Adam stuff for when Sarah is around to talk about it. And just know that she's having a great time in Guatemala. But let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we will start getting into all of the ways that you or whoever you're going to send this to can be a better man. And we're back. Sarah hates when I want to say that. So now I get to say that because she's not here. So a lot of people ask me, and this happens on TikTok. I get asked this a lot, but also just in general, about why it is that I'm so vocal about calling out shitty behavior and how I'm maybe capable of parsing it down to what the actual problem is. Because there's a lot of times, this is especially on TikTok, where there'll be someone with a video out there trying to give some life advice, and I'll be calling it out for having some issues. And people who agreed with it at first didn't see the issues until I brought them up. And I want to say that I think that unfortunately, and this is just maybe an element of our society, that one of the first steps to being a better man and trying to be a good man is being a shitty one at first. Because I think that when you have been shitty, when you've been manipulative, when you've been misogynistic, when you've been the quote unquote nice guy, when you've you know guilted people, when you've used the blue balls excuse, when you've cyber stalked someone who you were into, when you haven't when someone is obviously not interested in going out, but you've tried to persist because you think that's what you're supposed to do. And when all of these things, when you've built up these fantasies of you being a white knight, riding in to rescue a damsel in distress, all of this stuff that is shitty behavior, when you've done all of those things, it makes it a lot easier to recognize even the beginnings of those behaviors in other people. And I also think that when you've done those things, it's a lot easier to understand why they're bad. There are, a lot of things that and I've talked about this many, many times, that there are a lot of things that I've done in the past that I'm not proud of. And, some of it was abuse of power. Some of it was, just even my sense of humor not being appropriate. There has been just a variety of things that I made, did my best to make amends for, but I was still aware that it was problematic behavior. And I wrote about it on a blog post. I was kind of patting myself on the back a little too aptly. And then I had women friends come out and say, you still do some of these things, and this is still a problem. And then I had other people attack me, and I had a whole thing happen. And I had to look at myself, really look at myself, and really break down, was I still being performative? Was I really not a good person? And it took some time. It took therapy. It took a lot of self-reflection. It took a lot of listening to women to start to understand what I had still been doing wrong. And even now, like listening to earlier episodes of the podcast, sometimes I say that like I actually go back and listen, knowing what I've said in earlier episodes of the podcast, I cringe a little bit sometimes, because I know that I said things even 5 years ago when we started the podcast that I wouldn't say today. It's always been a learning and growing experience. So I think when you are shitty, when you're a shitty person, it's a lot easier to become a less shitty person than it is if you're just kind of a neutral, bland person. Because when you're a shitty person, you can recognize the shitty behavior, because a lot of times you know that you're doing it. Like you get defensive about it, you're projecting things, and when you actually start to face it, you understand what it is. And it's a lot easier to swing in the other way, because it's an extreme shitty behavior, extreme positive behavior. And it's easy to get passionate about it because you know a lot about it. Like you're well informed on how it is to be shitty. So if you are someone who is who is toxic, and you've done toxic things, there is hope if you actually want to change. Now, are there men out there who have never done or said anything wrong, have never had any toxic thoughts, have never subscribed to systemic misogyny in any capacity? Probably. I don't think there are a lot. I don't think it's a high percentage, but I will say that there are a percentage of men out there that probably have never really been toxic. They've just been neutral. They've just been bland. And they've just been boring old guys who just going in their paths, never subscribing to things that contribute to rape culture, never subscribing to negative behaviors, but never doing anything to support women either, never doing anything to aggressively be an ally, etc. And I think it's going to be it's a lot harder for those men. Those men are the ones that tend to become these vocal anti-feminist misogynists because they get so defensive when they haven't exhibited toxic behavior, not understanding that we have to appreciate men as a whole, as an actual monolith. And then generally people, you can't do that, but when we're looking at patriarchal society and systemic misogyny, men as a monolith, the behavior of men and women having to treat men in a certain way as a whole because they don't know who's safe and who's not. And these neutral, bland guys get very defensive about that because they've like, I've never done this in my life. I would never do that. Like it appalls me. And they don't understand that they can still contribute to the problem just by being neutral. So I think I want to at least start there. So if you are someone who's a good man, and by good I mean you genuinely have never done anything toxic in your life, that's this misogynistic. You don't like jokes about women. You don't like you're not a person who sits there has locker room talk. That stupid bullshit. Anything like that. And it's someone like you. You have to understand that you are still part of the problem, that our society is patriarchal in nature. It's systemic. It is built into our society. We have to dismantle it piece by piece. But what that means is that like society is like just like a big river going downstream, and by floating downstream and not getting in the way of anybody else and not hurting anybody, but just still floating downstream, you're still taking advantage of everything that a misogynistic society has to give you. And in until you stand up against the flow and start to call out behavior and be a vocal ally, it will be very difficult for you to ever be someone who's not part of the problem. You are part of the problem when you're neutral, because there's no true neutrality when the system is already biased against women and when the system already supports rape culture and misogyny. Then there is no neutrality, because by being neutral, you're already on the bad side. So I hope that men can understand that and hear that and understand why it's bad for you to get defensive about something like, not, when someone says men don't do this, and then you start screaming out not all men, or why you have to demonize all men. There is a reason for that. And if you don't get defensive about it and actually think about it a little bit, use a little critical thinking skills, you can get past it and you can become, at least maybe start taking the steps to becoming a better man. Now, I have broken this down into first step, second step, third, fourth, 6 steps to being a better man. Yeah, 6 steps. And they're pretty simple steps. Actually, no, they're not simple. They're very simple. They are childishly simple, but they're also so easy to get, feel the hair on the back of your neck get all bristled and get angry and defensive when you hear things, because you've been taught by society, or you've listened to idiots like fucking Jordan Peterson, who is a garbage human being, or you've put these ideas in your head and you're not willing to accept other ideas. So let's start with that. Let's try to start accepting new ideas. And that's what the first step is. And this is going to be the hardest step for most of you. The first step is going to be to recognize the existence of male privilege. And I know that is, and I know from TikTok alone, just from the arguments that I get, that is the most difficult way, difficult step, is to recognize that it even exists at all, because you hear the word privilege and you immediately associate it with being like wealthy and things like that. But that's not what we're talking about in this sense. So that's what you first have to not get defensive about and understand that the concept, the phrase male privilege does not mean you're rich and you have all the money you want and you have the rights to do whatever you want in the world. That's not what it means. Male privilege is simply a description for the system of advantages that you have, that men have solely for being men. That's male privilege. Is that there's a system of advantages and rights that men have just for being men. And there is disparity among different types of men based on you being able to take advantage of these benefits as well. Obviously, your access to these benefits depends on how closely you kind of match that masculine norm that society has determined is what men are, which is where toxic masculinity comes in, a whole nother concept we'll be discussing about, this ideal masculine norm. And so can you as a man be negatively affected by a system put in place by men? Absolutely. Absolutely. Men of color, gay men, trans men, poor men, any man who's in an oppressed class is is in a very touchy place, because they manage to be basically constrained by the patriarchy and kept down by the patriarchy while also still benefiting from their privilege. And so I think that there's, because male privilege is so like insidiously involved in our society, there are so many ways for men to have this privilege that doesn't actually affect you positively in other ways in the world that you'd like it'd be nice to be like, oh, I have male privilege, I can do this, and for example, men versus women get an advantage in the workplace, in most cases in the workplace. There's been plenty of studies about this where people send out blind like resumes with, one has a woman's name, one has a man's name, otherwise identical, and the number of interviews and calls that they got were drastically different. And then if you want to take it a step further, men of color have less likelihood than white men and than white women. So there's some disparity among there. So a lot of male privilege is actually white privilege, and then there's male privilege as well. Is there anything female privilege people usually ask, or yeah, what about pretty privilege or women privilege? No. And I know that people are going to argue with me on this, but there is no such thing as pretty privilege or female privilege. Women getting objectified, women getting attention, women who can post on Instagram and get 1,000 likes for a photo may sound like privilege at the start, but it's they're basically being objectified by their audience, and that's not a privilege. Pretty privilege, being getting something special because you are attractive, is being objectified. So that is already belittling and denigrating who you are as a person. That's not a privilege. So let's get into some specific examples of what male privilege is, because I want any men listening to kind of understand what this concept means and try not to get defensive about it again. Here's a one great example: crash test dummies. Did you know that crash test dummies were designed for male anatomy? So they actually didn't design them for women. For women who are top heavy, obviously they have larger breasts. They didn't take it into consideration at all for their safety measures and safety ratings, because all of the engineers involved were all men, and nobody ever thought, hey, we should look at what women's bodies also are like. And and this also goes into this idea that doctors learn more about male anatomy and physiology, and are decades behind understanding problems that face women, like endometriosis and things like that. I mean, they still don't understand what the G spot is, and that just goes to show that physicians and science, because there was such a barrier to entry to women, that still has an issue. There's still a barrier to entry, but that's lessened, but it's still there. Um, because of that, you don't have when you don't have diversity in the decision making, you don't have diversity in the products that get put out. And that's basically what's happening. Crash test dummies, all men, because it was all men that designed it. They never even thought of it. Doctors have so little understanding of of women's anatomy and physiology, and don't even get me started on of people of color, or even you have even less advantage in that case. They, I mean, doctors don't understand, even how like bruising and things like that on people of color skin. It's terrible, but this is a systemic thing. So this isn't like it's not like a privilege that you have a crash test dummy that looks like you. That's not like I know that you don't feel like that's a privilege. That is just part of male privilege. That's part of the fact that safety tests are designed with your body in mind, not with a woman's. That's an example of male privilege. Um, let's look at media, books, movies, television shows, all created to make men the center of everything. Men are the heroes, men are the villains, men are the funny sidekicks, and then women are the love interest. Women are the trophy to be captured. Women are the mystery to be solved. Women are the enigma that won't be understood. But they're never human beings. And obviously, this is starting to change now. And this is also, once again, a lot of these things that I can say for male privilege also happen, also belong with white privilege as well. But it's because of movies where they were written by men, directed by men. The women were, if they did makeup and they acted in it. Maybe they did the wardrobe. Is that we have action heroes who ignore consent. I mean, if you look at James Bond movies and Indiana Jones and things like movies that I love, these are garbage men. Like these are men who will not take no for an answer. These are men who perpetuate that terrible myth of the asshole, the woman loves the asshole, or the bad boy, which is not a true statement, by the way. It's a whole other story to get into. I'm not going to get into right now, but it perpetuates this because this is written by men, and this is what men think, and men don't actually. Nobody ever asked women their opinion, and I think that's the big problem here. So media is another example, is that as especially as a white man, but as a man, you can pick up any random movie and you're the focus of the movie. So it's about you, it's your perspective, it's your viewpoint. You can identify with the protagonist of 98% of movies and television shows that exist. Women can't, like people of color can't in most cases as well. But even it just the fact that you can identify with the protagonist, that's an example of male privilege. Just that you take that for granted. That when you go to a movie, you're going to feel like excited about what's happening, whereas a lot of times women go in there, they what they get to watch is them being the object, and it's not something you'd ever consciously think of. We can talk about beauty standards, how women are expected to have a certain beauty standard, a certain look, even a certain personality. Women are told by strangers to smile. Women who are assertive are called bitches. And if they express emotion, they're called hysterical or asked if they're on their period. If they don't express too much emotion, they're cold. Women who have too much sex are considered sluts. If they don't have enough sex, are called everyone calls them frigid. And this doesn't happen to men. And I'm sure someone can come up with a random exception, but with almost 99.9% of the time, this does not happen to men. Men who are assertive are praised. Men who go out and have sex are champions. Men who decide not to have sex are usually like who hold back or like lauded or praised for being for not giving in to their terrible instincts, because apparently there's this whole consideration that people try to say, well, men have needs, so if you don't give into your needs, then you're admirable somehow. So men went out in every single one of the situations. Men aren't told to smile on the street. Men aren't told by strangers. No strangers like, hey, you'd look prettier if you smiled. No one's ever said that to a man. They have said that to women thousands of times. They've probably said that to women a dozen times across the world by the time I've just finished this recording. Just in the time it takes to say this part. There's a great example of this too. There was the superhero Brie Larson, she's not a superhero. She played a superhero, Captain Marvel, in the recent Marvel movies. And in the posters, she's very serious faced. And literally, there were articles being written by the media saying that she should have smiled more. So her response was to take all of the posters of Captain America and Iron Man and Doctor Strange and Photoshop a smile on their face and show how stupid it looked. And it's this idea that women should try to present themselves as being likable. And if they don't do it likable enough, if they're too likable, then they're slutty. If they don't do it likable enough, then they're cold. And that is a standard that is set by society. Are there women who also set that standard? Absolutely. That's part of being like systemic misogyny infects everybody, men, women, non-binary people. Everybody has it. It just takes, it takes some people a long time to break out of it. Some people decide just to plug their ears and go along with it. But male privilege is where you don't, as a man, you don't have that ever happen to you. Nobody's gonna hold you to these same standards that they hold women. We can say, I'm going to give a couple more examples of male privilege. Women are presumed to be the caretakers of the family to such a degree that it hangs over their entire lives. I mean, of course, women can't get hysterectomies at the young age if they decide they want to, because doctors will say, well, no, what if you want a family? Or what if your husband wants another child? That still happens in today's society. And that is not, that's obviously that's a lack of bodily autonomy. That's absolute bullshit. Women will be asked, think about how many actresses or successful businesswomen have been asked, well, so how are you going to balance your home life with taking care of the kids with with working? No one's ever asked a man that. And that is once again an example of male privilege, is that when you're a man, you're not expected to be the caretaker, so it's okay. Now, of course, that does backfire on men. Like, this whole patriarchal system backfires on men, because now what happened was, the system put in place for women not to have rights. So, women are just things, they're just your objects, so it doesn't matter. But once women started to get rights and start to try to get equality and equity as well, which is, two separate things but very important, they started to get divorced because they realized they were trapped in shitty marriages with shitty people that they didn't want to be married to. So by creating this system where women were essentially the caretakers, so that they were essentially your servant at home, men are now being trapped into this, because now when it comes time for divorce, they are being told, well, you don't get custody, or you have to pay this much in child support because your wife is the full-time caretaker. And a lot of men don't like this. They get very angry because they like their life of having an indentured servant at their home, and they don't like understand why they have to pay to equalize, put her on the same level as if she had worked a full-time job during that period. Not that, of course, being a homemaker is a full-time job, but I mean a full-time job in the world of being paid in wages and everything. So that's kind of backfired on men. But the fact that women are presumed to be the caretakers, once again, male privilege. If you're a dad, very few people are going to ask you, well, how do you balance your child care with your work? They just tell you, hey, good job for working 80 hours this week. Here's another quick example of male privilege. Every study that's ever been done shows that men are worse drivers. Men are absolutely worse drivers. Yet we have this stereotype that's perpetuated that women are the worst drivers, that they can't handle it, that men have like some innate ability to drive better. And even insurance companies buy into this bullshit and penalize women as drivers. And if that's that's an absolute privilege. That's an actual privilege that as men you can lock onto and use. So what else is there with male privilege? This is kind of the broader aspect of male privilege. This is the idea of rape culture as well, that we, like, as men, and that means the men before us and the men before them, all so on and so on, have created a culture where men feel entitled to women. Women are objectified. Women are there for our pleasure, entertainment, and everything else. Women cannot reject a man without being, without a risk. Obviously, it doesn't happen every time, but women can't reject a man without the risk of being assaulted or murdered. They can't even walk down a street without the concern of being catcalled. They can't just go out into public being themselves without someone shaming them for what they're wearing, or honking at them, or somehow thinking that they're entitled to tell them to smile, to anything. That doesn't happen to men. Women can't, for example, walk around the grocery store or to the mall. They can't walk to their car without in the back of their head thinking about their safety. And I've heard some men say, well, I have to be careful of my safety too, blah, blah, blah. Stop being fucking disingenuous, because that's what it is. Yes, you might walk in a bad part of town and think about your safety when you're walking your car, but I guarantee when you're walking in the middle of the broad fucking daylight from the grocery store to your car, you're not thinking about your safety. For women, it's innate. It's a thing that they have to be concerned of 24/7. There are women that'll have stories that they'll be like, they check under their cars, they check their back seats. They're always just kind of very careful because they never know when there's going to be some creepy dude who thinks he's entitled to them as a whole. And that is the epitome of male privilege, is that we don't have these fears of being existing in society without being harassed and assaulted and mistreated and tracked down by women. Can women stalk? Yes, of course. Can women harass? Yes. Does it happen on the extreme level with the percentages, especially to strangers, that it happens from men to women? No, absolutely not. Men are the perpetrators in most situations, even against other men, to be honest, as well. So our first step of being a better man is to acknowledge and understand male privilege. Don't get defensive about it. Don't be sitting here thinking, but I'm just a stupid, useless piece of shit with a worthless piece of shit life, and my life is absolute trash, and I'm just a worthless sack of donkey shit. So how do I have privilege? Don't say that to yourself. However much of that might be true, I don't know, but instead try to understand that this is just ingrained in society, and these are just advantages that mean that you are treated differently than a woman. And if you can actually have a little empathy and walk a mile in a woman's shoes and understand that she has to see the world a little differently because of these things, you can see that the obstacles that she faces are different than you. And if you can understand that, then a lot of this gets so much easier. So that's a step that we're going to take here. It's just like, let's try to understand that you do have male privilege. It's not an opinion. It's not a maybe. You fucking have male privilege. Acknowledge it, accept it, and say, okay, now, how do I be better? How do I use this male privilege to try to make the better world better for everybody? And that's what we're going to get to after the break. Now, I did say earlier that I had 6 steps. I'm realizing after refreshing my notes that I actually have 5 steps, and I just used 2 of them. That they really should be separate steps. So just ignore that I had 6. We have 5 steps. Step number 2 is in being a better man is avoiding toxic masculinity behaviors and avoiding misogynistic behaviors, avoiding behaviors that contribute to rape culture, and overall just avoiding the behavior, like avoiding doing those behaviors yourself. And that should be easy. This should be the easy part. Because if you're already acknowledging, hey, there's male privilege, then acknowledging that toxic masculinity exists is a simple step. I do see people on TikTok and on Twitter and on YouTube try to argue against this. Well, what's wrong with masculinity? They say, well, jerking themselves off. And basically, there's nothing wrong with masculinity. Toxic masculinity is an aspect of masculinity. It doesn't mean all masculinity is toxic. But if you are so tied up in what's masculine and what's feminine, then that is toxic masculinity. That's what we need to stop worrying about. And so here's some examples of toxic masculinity. I promise this is going to be as long-winded as my other sections. I'm trying to do this in a reasonably short amount of time, but it's a heavy topic, and there's a lot of information. Toxic masculinity is gatekeeping gender roles. Boys do this, girls do this, men do this, and women can also have the toxic femininity. It's usually conservative white Christian women who are like, oh well, that's what boys do, that's what girls do, that type of stupid bullshit. It's saying that that boys don't die, don't paint their toenails, or oh, girls don't play with army toys. It's shit like that. It's buying gender specific toys because you think that this is boys need blue, girls need pink, things like that. Anything that says like you're not a real man if you do this, and you're not a real man, and this is what not a real man is to talk people who exhibit toxic masculinity. This is it's so funny. I was trying to write this out, and I was realizing how stupid this is, like how pathetically fucking stupid this is. But anything intellectual is not a real man. If you like to study, if you like to read, if you like to go to school, if you like to learn, if you're in college and things like that, a lot of that is considered, oh yeah, you're not a real man. Well, you study, you read. What the fuck's wrong with you? You read for fun. Anything creative, you like to take photos, you like to paint, you like to, write music. Once again, that's considered feminine. That's not manly. That's you're emasculating yourself if you like to paint, things like that. It's even barreled down to like people who say, oh well, you got a fruity drink, you get the girly drink. That's toxic masculinity. If you want a fucking drink with an umbrella in it and all the fruity, like fruit tasting flavors in the world, fucking drink it. it's not. It doesn't make you less of a man if that's what you like, and you don't want a beer because you don't like what piss tastes like. Okay, um, and it's interesting that anything that's like any type of vulnerability is considered not a real man. So, real men, quote unquote, are tough. They're stoic. They don't show any emotion, except, of course, when they resort to violence to defend the honor of someone, whoever it is, doesn't matter to them. It's just an object to them. Or when they get angry and they punch holes in the walls to express themselves. They don't consider those emotions because, of course, these are emotionally and just unintelligent people, and these are just blatantly unintelligent. Most toxic masculinity comes from stupidity, ignorance, and stupidity. People who follow this, it's because they are ignorant. They're dumb. They also are terrified of standing out. They're terrified of any individuality. They want to be part of a group, and that group they want to be part of is other men. They don't care what women think. They don't care what, even if it's a partner, a wife, whatever. They want to impress other men, and that boils down to suppressed homosexuality. Not, I'd say most of the time. Most of the time, what it is they are so afraid of exploring their sexuality in any capacity whatsoever because of the stigma of society, because of what all their friends would think, because that's not what a real man does, that they will repress it and repress it and repress it. And that repression turns out to be projection and hatred and misogyny. And they, if they just embrace the fact that, hey, they want the men in their lives to respect them and appreciate them and love them, even if it wasn't on a sexual basis, then they'd be healthier. But I think that so many men are so terrified of their actual feelings and their actual um, just sexual desires that they'll just close it off in their brains, and that just festers and becomes a huge, pus filled boil of toxicity and misogyny, because then they project it onto everybody else. I've said it for a while. Sexuality is a spectrum. If you were genuinely honest with yourself and weren't worried about what society would anybody else would say, and were being completely honest with yourself, you'd probably find that you're not 100% straight. That everybody is a little bit gay. Just even if it's just a little bit, that it is a spectrum. There's shades of gray, and I think that if straight men really focused on that a little bit and actually were honest with themselves, then they might gain a little more empathy and compassion and stop being so toxic. So anything that's, of course, anyone who's a trans, anyone who's gay, that's not a real man as well. So that's what, all of this manliness and bullshit of toxic masculinity comes into essentially, you're just not this John Wayne type. It's really what it boils down to. And so that's toxic masculinity. And so you want to avoid all of those behaviors. Like if you ever find yourself thinking, oh, this is kind of girly, or this isn't what a man would do, you need to stop that immediately. Stop that thought. Say, why do I care? What am I worried about? Am I worried about someone saying, oh, are you gay? Are you insulted by the fact that someone might say that? If someone's going to say that, that's projecting on them. That has nothing to do with you. If you're worried about someone saying, oh, that's not very manly, who the fuck is saying that? Like, these people are not healthy people. They are not people that you should care about their opinion in any capacity whatsoever. Other negative toxic behaviors, misogynist behaviors that we need to avoid would be things that contribute to rape culture, because rape culture it's kind of a pyramid. At the top is, of course, rape. As we get down there are other behaviors that contribute to it, that lead to it, because it can build and build and build. As we excuse the lesser behaviors, then it becomes easier and easier to excuse the more dangerous behaviors, until we get up to people getting actually assaulted and raped. And so that one of those things that's at the bottom of the pyramid that might seem harmless, is making rape jokes, domestic abuse jokes, things like that. They're not funny, and people do that because it's punching down. It's easy humor. It's low hanging fruit, and they're not funny because there's really no punchline. A lot of times it's the shock value of, oh, wow, this is about rape. It's how shocking, or it's about domestic abuse. How shocking. And you can combat that a lot of times by asking people what the punchline is. Ask them, what's so funny? Can you explain the joke to me? And if they have to explain the joke to you, then they get mad, they get frustrated, and they're like, well, you don't have a sense of humor. And then you can tell that they don't have the ability to explain it. like any of the material that I tell on stage, I can explain the joke, I can explain the setup, I can explain the punchline, and I can explain it in a way that it shows why it's considered a joke. Now I know not all jokes have a format like that, but simply just saying something for shock value, that's not that's just it's not funny. It's not a joke. But what it does is it normalizes this behavior. We laugh at it. We're like, oh, I have a dark sense of humor. It's okay. A dark sense of humor is not punching down. A dark sense of humor is when you deal with your own traumas and the negative things that have happened to you in your life with a sense of humor. That's a dark sense of humor. Someone with a dark sense of humor is someone who deals with the shit that they get that gets thrown at them in a comedic way. And dealing with what happens to other people by making jokes about it is not dark sense of humor. That's just being shitty and misogynistic. So rape jokes are not okay. If you hear someone telling one, say that's not funny, man. Just call them out for it. It's the same for any type of racial jokes as well. I think that should go without saying. Anything that perpetuates this rape culture. Playing devil's advocate is also toxic behavior. The devil doesn't need a fucking advocate. If you're just trying to, somehow make a point because you want to argue, join a fucking debate club. Okay, your general human being making a point on the internet does not want you to come up and play devil's advocate because all you're doing is normalizing a shitty response. And I think that's not going to be healthy for you either. So that's the toxic behaviors. Those toxic behaviors will eat you up inside. There's more of them, but this is just an example that you need to pay attention to. Anything that might make you worry about what other men are going to think, or is it manly, or is it girl? Like if you're trying to assign gender roles to things in your head, or assign sexuality, like is this going to make me look gay? Anything like that. If you think about that before you do a behavior, then you need to really process why you're worrying about that. And then I insist that you do the behavior you're worried about. Like, please just go do it because you're going to feel much freer when you don't give a fuck what random weird misogynistic men think about. I feel like that's going to be a plus for you. So we're going to head and get back to the next steps. I'm going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Okay, our third and fourth steps on how to be a better man are very simple. Third step is to stop excusing bad behaviors. And there's a couple things you can do to avoid that. Number one is I see men and women try to be helpful sometimes when someone's being shitty, like a guy's posting a rape joke or saying some shitty things about women. I say, well, those aren't men, those are boys. That's excusing their behavior. That is acknowledging that it's bad, but not willing to identify them as men. And you don't want to do that because those are real adult men who live adult lives doing those behaviors. And it's a way to try to sometimes to be like, well, I'm a man and I don't agree with that. He's not one of us. No, he is one of us. That is a man doing that. And we need to call him out and say, hey, listen, men don't do this. You need to grow up. You need to do better. So you don't want to excuse those behaviors. So let's try to avoid ever saying things like, well, that's a boy. That's not that's not a real man. That's still a little boy. Because no, the guy's 40, has a beard, probably hasn't washed his ass in 10 years. That is a man. And that is the problem. The problem is that these are fucking men doing this, not boys. I would say that another excuse is to stop getting defensive because that's a way to you're excusing your own behavior, but you're excusing someone else's behavior by trying to once again take the blame off and say, well, why do you have to say that in that way? Couldn't you say it nicer? No, let people who have been hurt or affected, people who are in oppressed and marginalized groups, when they want to express their anger, let them express their anger in whatever fucking way they want to. Do not try to tone police that. Do not try to excuse the other person's behavior. Well, this is how you acted, because that's not acceptable. And the not all men thing is a huge, huge thing. It happens so many times where men will say things like that in one of my videos, and I'll hear them say, well, you don't have to paint all men with the same brush, etc. And I it's hard for me to understand that, because when I see a woman say something, either I hate when men do this, or men, please don't do this, or Men are like blah blah blah. I never look at that and say, well, I don't do those things, because I just know I don't do those things. It doesn't. I know that that's not talking to me, and I know that, but that's something that she experiences a lot of. So instead, I'm just empathetic towards her and feel bad that she's had to go through that. That's the reaction you should be having to the not all men, or to not to when someone says something about men. Reacting with not all men is, it's not acceptable. That's just you getting defensive, which tells on you a little bit. Even if you're one of those neutral people I talked about before, it shows that maybe you're not as good as you thought you were. If you're sitting there worried about that, reflecting on you. And most of the time, people say things like, "Men, please just leave women alone in public," or "Men, please don't stalk somebody who blocks you on Facebook. Men, please don't start off your dating app conversation with 'Hey, sexy,' whatever." And in none of those do they say all men who exist in the world. Even if that's their intention, it doesn't say that. It just says men. Men can apply to a small group of men. It can apply to two men, one man, one man. That's two. That's men right there. It can apply to a large group of men, a small group of men. It doesn't matter. So if you read that and you immediately get defensive, you are telling on yourself that you do those behaviors. Because when I read those, I read that as being men who do these things, just, unspoken, who do these things. Please don't do these things. So that's how you should start to understand that. That half the time they're not even saying all men. But even if they were, it's not about you. It's about her experience and what she's been going through. So grow the fuck up, and you don't need to give your 2 cents in that situation. And as far as stop excusing behaviors, the biggest aspect of this is to listen and believe women. Part of understanding like your male privilege is understanding that there is insidious, dangerous, misogynistic, predatory, toxic things happening to people all across the globe every single fucking minute. And women, it happens to women more than it happens to men. And the perpetrators are usually men in most cases. But it there is always something happening. And you don't need to try to play devil's advocate, and in a situation, don't try to be like, well, why did this person say this to you? Like, what did you say to them? Don't try to take a random stranger's position. Don't try to victim blame in any way. Don't say, well, what did you say? What did you do? What were you wearing? Where were you? Why were you drinking? None of those things. Or next time do this. That's excusing the behavior. The behavior is toxic and shitty regardless of anything else. If a woman gets assaulted, if a woman gets raped, if a woman gets stalked, what she was wearing, what she said, what she did, none of those things matter. The action itself is the problem. Because if it wasn't for the man performing the action, nothing she wore would have mattered in the long run. I did a TikTok where I asked women what they would do if men were gone for 24 hours. It just disappeared. And most of them were things like, oh my God, I'd take a walk at night. I'd finally feel safe going out in public. I'd go to a bar, because it's such an insidious element of our society as a whole that women would rather stay in than go out and socialize, because they just don't want to have to deal with men. They don't want to have to say no and reject men and push them off. And they just want to live their fucking lives. So when a woman is telling a story and explaining something that happened to her, the worst thing you can do is try to excuse the other person's behavior or try to add context to it or mitigating factors. Just listen and believe her and empathize. And there's this whole thing about, well, we listen and believe women, but what about false accusations? That is a bullshit argument. Okay, that it's one of those arguments that men try to bring up as if it actually fucking means something. False accusations, by all reports, take up between 2 to 10% of all accusations. And we already know how few accusations actually ever make it beyond an accusation. How they ever make it to being investigated, anyways? Because most cases ended up dissolving, anyways, because the society doesn't take assault against women seriously. They don't take assault against men, like sexual assault against men, seriously either, but definitely against women. So I mean, even actual sexual assault that has like a video and a witness, the kid gets 6 months in jail, or if there's any prison time at all, just maybe probation because he seems like a good kid. So don't bring up false accusations that as any type of defense. Don't let somebody use that as a defense. It's not. It's not a real thing. It doesn't. False accusations do not. They're a blip on the fucking radar compared to the actual sexual assault and harassment that happens in society. So, um, by trying to offer excuses when someone's telling you a story, you are helping perpetuate the fact that maybe she deserved it, and that's unacceptable behavior. So that's the third step, is to stop excusing behaviors. And then the fourth step is to call out shitty behaviors when you see it. And then I think that's such an important thing, is that, like I said before, if you're neutral, if you're just flowing, flowing down the river, you are part of the problem. You need to stand up against the flow. Calling out bad behavior in public and in private is important, because in public, obviously, you want to make sure that your voice is heard so that other men can see that and people can see that this is not okay. But in private, it's even more important, because if it's just you with another group, with just a group of men, and there's no women around, and men are saying shitty things, if you stand up to the shitty person, you're going to find that other men who are kind of also neutral maybe might also decide, oh, I agree, I just was too afraid to say anything because of toxic masculinity, where they don't want to, they don't want to piss off the guys, they don't want to do something that makes the guys think they're less of a man, they don't want to stand up for a woman, they don't want to be a fucking simp or whatever, the stupid new phrasing that comes out every time somebody's nice to a woman. And all these toxic unwashed ass morons who don't actually like women get all up in arms about it. So it's important to call out behavior whenever you see it. Now, that being said, there's a bit of a balancing act. You want to call out bad behavior without being a white knight. Women do not need you to rescue them. Unless someone specifically comes and says, hey, will you talk to this person, because I don't think they're going to listen to me as a woman, they might only listen to you as a man, which is obviously toxic behavior on their part, you can step in. If you see a comment that there is something that's not okay, you can comment and say, hey, not okay, but you don't need to rescue the person being attacked. That is, once again, that's the other side of misogyny, is that you're seeing her as someone less than human, someone who can't stand up for herself, someone who needs rescuing, who's a damsel in distress, who's a little porcelain doll that you have to protect and box up and be careful about. Women know how to assert for themselves. Women can stand up for themselves. You need to allow that, give women the space to breathe and do that, while also asserting that you disagree with their behavior in a separate way, without trying to say, well, she doesn't deserve the blah blah. You just need to explain to them why it's not okay, regardless of the woman who is being attacked in that situation. So it is a little bit of a fine line, and I think it's very important to just keep that in mind. That just, if you come riding into the rescue every single time someone says anything the slightest bit negative, then you end up being part of the problem, because while she might be initially thankful that you said something, it also does feel like then you're stepping up because she doesn't know how to speak for herself, and you don't want that mentality at all. So that's all about calling out bad behavior. So like those are two steps that, once you've identified your male privilege, and you understand it, once you've identified the toxically masculine behaviors and the misogynist behaviors, you stop those. Like those are two huge steps. So then stopping excusing behaviors and calling out bad behaviors are those are good. That's means you're kind of stepping, now you're turning things into the right direction. You've stopped being toxic. Now you're helping others see that toxic behavior is not okay. And the final step in being a good man and being a better man is to treat women like human beings. I know this is a just fucking groundbreaking as hell, right? Yeah, treat them like they're human beings, like they're people. Like don't treat them like they're little porcelain dolls. Don't treat them like they're there to be, your sex slave, or they're there to be your house cleaner. Don't treat them like, like they're an object for you. Don't treat them like you have any right to them. Don't act like you have the any entitlement to them at all. Um, and so some of the ways you can treat women like human beings is, number one, leave them the fuck alone. Leave women alone in public. If you see a woman and you think to yourself, wow, she's really hot, I should go talk to her. You have to think about that for a second. What are you actually saying? You're saying, oh, I'm thinking with my dick right now and I'd really like to fuck her, so I'm going to go disrupt her day because I find her attractive. That's entitlement. That's objectification. That is garbage behavior. If you see someone who's attractive and you make eye contact with her and she seems to hold eye contact with you and maybe smile and she looks back and she looks back at you, and so there's a little bit of actual nonverbal communication there, then maybe it's okay to go talk to her. But otherwise, leave women the fuck alone. They're human beings living their lives in public. They don't want your greasy dumbass going up and talking to them. And if they do, they will make it abundantly clear. They will give you all the body language signals out there. And if for some reason they're too shy to do so and you don't pick up on the signals and you don't have a connection with them, so fucking what? Life is not a romance novel. You will survive. They will survive. And if it's meant to be, then you guys will run into each other again, and then you'll actually have something to talk about. Hey, didn't I just see you at blah blah blah? And you can talk at that point. Another great tip on how to treat women like human beings is don't compare them to objects or cars or anything. There's so many. Every male dating coach has garbage fucking advice about dealing with women. Like one thing that says, why should you listen to me instead of listen to what women have to say? Well, you wouldn't talk to the fish about, you talk to a fisherman, not to the fish about how to catch a fish. Women aren't fish. So that's a terrible analogy. I had this guy who was like, well, women are like no, men are like cars. And no, no, I'm sorry. What did he say? Yeah, I'm sorry. I lost it there. I think he said women are like cars, and you don't necessarily like gasoline, but you need that gasoline. Something like that. He had this terrible analogy. Maybe he was comparing men to cars and women were the gas pump, is what it was basically. The cars need gas, and so you want to give them the gas when they need it. And so when a man comes home, you should have a 24/7 open sign. Like he basically was talking about the fact that women should always be ready to have sex at any moment, and then that should be acceptable. Yeah, don't compare women to objects. Don't compare women to animals. Don't compare, which by the way, don't call women females because it's an adjective first of all, and it's untrue. There are women who are not females, and there are people who are female who are not women. So that's just stupid. You just look like a fucking dumbass when you do that. Um, then there might be an argument. Well, what about calling men dogs? Yeah, that seems appropriate because that every time a man chases something, when he actually gets a woman that he's chasing, he never knows what to do with it. Right? That's when he backs off. So like that analogy seems appropriate, and it's okay for there to be a double standard, men. It's okay. You can survive if there's a double standard because when you have a marginalized, oppressed groups, women, people of color, trans community, etc., punching down on them, dehumanizing them, othering them, all of these things, objectifying, marginalizing in other ways, all of those things, unacceptable behavior. When you are the oppressor, when you're okay with the fact that you are part of the oppressor class because you're trying to do something about it, you're trying to be a better person. When you are the oppressor, whatever people have to say in order to combat your oppression is okay. That's a double standard you're going to have to fucking live with. And if you're a mature adult, you can handle it. And that here's another example of how to treat women like human beings and being a mature adult. Learn how to accept rejection. Okay, if I know that it's scary to ask a woman out, it's so scary. I mean, of course, women are just terrified that they might get murdered, but you're so scared because you have to ask a woman out. Oh no, yeah, grow the fuck up. Rejection happens to everyone. If you can't handle rejection, then you shouldn't be doing anything in life. If a woman rejects you and your next response is to call her fat or ugly or that you didn't want her anyways or you were just joking, you are an immature little moron and you should probably just never socialize in any capacity whatsoever. Uh, Learn how to accept rejection gracefully. Someone says no, say I appreciate it. Good luck, and leave them alone. Leave them the fuck alone. Don't leave the door open because if at some point they change their mind, they'll come to you. I promise. So just leave them the fuck alone. Treat women with respect, even in private. treat them like you would want to be treated. And unless you think that you're a piece of trash who doesn't deserve any respect, but treat women like you want to be treated. Treat women with respect. It's funny, like when Sarah would go on dates and she would tell people that she had a podcast, and so many men were terrified of being on the podcast. That tells you something. That tells you that, because they'd be like, "Oh, well, you're going to talk about me in your podcast," and Sarah'd be like, "Only if you're shitty." So what does that say about you that you're worried about this? What kind of shitty behavior do you do on a regular basis? So keep that in mind. Do not treat women with disrespect. If you're like, if you only do it, treat women with respect because you're worried about what people will say, you're not actually respecting them. You're just being disingenuous. And I know this is a huge one. How about you act like you actually like women? I mean, crazy, right? Like that'd be insane. We did an episode probably a couple months ago, which if you haven't listened to, I encourage you to listen to, called "Do Men Even Like Women?" And it shows how many men just don't like women at all. And that's sad to me. Why wouldn't you like people that you purport to want to spend your life with? So maybe if you start learning how to like them, go to therapy, things like that, which I know is another toxically masculine thing that's not manly to go to therapy. You should go to therapy. Whoever's listening to this, you should go to therapy. Find the right one for you, but go to therapy. And talk it through, figure out why you have the behaviors you have, why you're having the feelings you have. If you can't process this on your own, you need somebody to help you with that. They can help you develop the tools, but also you should learn how to like the people that you want to spend time sexually with, romantically with, and just even platonically with. So there's the 5 steps, um, and they're the very simple steps. Understand your male privilege. Understand toxic masculinity. um, don't excuse bad behaviors, call out bad behaviors, and then treat women like human beings, and you can be on the path to a better man. Now I do want to, there's going to be some like anticipation of rebuttal here from the men's rights activists that I want to get into before I end the episode, so I'm going to get to that right after a short break. All right, let's get into the final section of the episode. I appreciate everyone who has stuck with me, and hopefully you've enjoyed this. Um, we're going to talk about men's rights activists. There is a component of society filled with these disingenuous shitweasels who are so desperate for attention and to be oppressed. They want to be the victim so badly that they have decided that men's rights are at risk. And it's basically just an excuse for them to hate women. And they'll say, "Oh no, I don't hate women. I hate modern feminism." Blah blah blah, because they're basically terrified of progress and of society becoming more inclusive to marginalized, oppressed groups, and so they have decided that there's a war with men. There's not a war with men, but let's talk about it just to address some of the issues that I know that they'll bring up, because I've watched their shitty little pathetic videos. Um, and it's funny. I saw this one, and it's this guy who has a big following, and everyone likes him because he talks kind of gently, but he is such a garbage person. It was women saying, with this Roe versus Wade stuff, would like to hear from our male allies. Are you speaking up? How are you helping us? And instead of talking about how he supports women and want their right to choose and everything like that, he showed clips of women saying, "My uterus, my opinion, it's my body, my opinion, etc." And says, "What should I'm not allowed to say anything." And that just demonstrates how much of a disingenuous piece of shit he is, because obviously the ultimate goal is it's a woman's body, it's her opinion. And I know there's other aspects of the trans men, non-binary people, but I'm just going to say this for the sake of the men's rights activists, because that's how they identify. They don't recognize most marginalized identities, anyways. But and the yes, that's the goal, is someone with a uterus. It's their body, their opinion. They have control over it. If they, a man can, by having sex with a woman, a man has consent to whatever foreseeable things happen, including pregnant, including abortion, etc. Um, but it's not there. We're not there. So right now they are fighting for their bodily autonomy. And his response is say, "Well, you said it's not our opinion, so why would we try to help you?" That just goes to show just how fucking pathetic these losers are. Yeah, and should I give us? Yeah, his TikTok name is like Match Owly, and he's one of the worst, most insidious ones because he makes what sounds like good points, but then you realize no, he absolutely despises women with every fiber of his unwashed ass, and it's pathetic. Um, but so let's go into some of these points and some of these men's rights activist losers. What we'll talk about. Do men suffer from sexual harassment and assault? Yes, obviously, of course, this happens. A men's rights activist will be like, well, it's severely underreported, so we don't even know how much it happens. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. It's also severely underreported with women. To a much of a degree, do you know how many women get ridiculed or victim blamed or just like, oh well, what were you wearing? You shouldn't have done that. Why? Like, and basically put at fault for it too. So it happens just as much with women, if maybe more so. And and of course, anybody who subscribes to toxic masculinity, men or women, are going to do the same thing to men that they do to women. Well, men who get sexually assaulted, especially like we see like a teenage high school teacher, woman high school teacher, and a male student, and they're like, oh well, he should have liked it, or oh, I wish I was that that student. Yeah, that's toxic behavior. That's toxic masculinity doing that. That's not people who subscribe to any of the principles of modern feminism saying that. That is a patriarchal, systemically misogynist group of people saying this shit. Um, and they say the same thing to women. They victim blame women. So like the same thing happens. And I think that it's one of those situations like these men's rights activists like to pretend they're the only victims, and they purposely skew statistics and ignore the fact that most of the perpetrators of sexual assault and harassment are men. And that yes, women do assault other women occasionally, sexually assault other women occasionally, other men occasionally, in domestic relationships. Women assault men. They that happens. Yes, of course. In a parent-child, women assault children. Yes, that happens. But men are still the vast majority of the perpetrators. So the problem is not, well, what are we going to do about these women? Probably, what are we going to do about the society that allows this to happen, and the greater number of men that think this is acceptable behavior? Because if we got rid of toxic masculinity, if we started eliminating rape culture, that would diminish for everybody. But see, men's rights activists don't want to help women too. They only want to help themselves because they are the only victims. They don't know how to be supportive or empathetic. Another point they bring up: do men get less custody after divorce? Yes, and you can blame society and men for that. Um, Once again, like I talked about a little while ago, is just that, yeah, because men said women are the caretakers, and then of course women started getting divorced because they realized they're in shitty marriages, and men are like, oh, but why is she going to be the caretaker? Yeah, shut the fuck up, dude. Studies have actually shown that men who are active parents during the marriage and then also participate in the court hearings properly and show up and bring the documentation and all that stuff and don't throw little mantrums and get all hysterical about it and decide not to try, actually have a very high chance of getting equal custody. So they'll throw out these studies, well, yeah, men always get screwed, and women get the benefit of the doubt. Women do get the benefit of the doubt a lot of times, but if you were an active father in during the marriage, and that doesn't mean working 80 hours a week and not trying to participate in the household at all, but you actually were an active parent, then and you show up for court, then your chances are fine. So it's a non-issue. Grow the fuck up. And then the biggest, not the biggest, another one. Actually, this is the funniest in my opinion. That men's rights activists bring up is that men get harsher prison sentences than women. What kind of like weird brag is that? It's just like, okay, so you just think that you're worried about criminals getting harsher, but if you ask them, well, what about black men getting a worse statement than, worse sentencing than white men, they won't have anything to say that because a lot of them are a little bit white supremacy right there, if you can imagine. But so there, of course, you can thank society for that. There's this idea that women are weaker, which we know they're actually not. Women as a whole are stronger when we talk about emotional, resonance, their ability to react and respond to problematic situations and everything. But we have this idea that they're weaker, so they get shorter prison sentences. So blame society for that. But once again, why are we using that as some type of example that men's rights are at risk? Your right to get a shorter prison sentence? Is that what it is? That's not what a right is, by the way. That's the other stupid thing about men's rights activists is that none of these are rights. These are things that some men face. The biggest issue being like mental health. is that men don't have access to mental health treatment. Yes, they fucking do. Women didn't have access to mental health treatment. You know what they did? They built access to mental health treatment. Men can also build access. Well, society tells us that we're weak if we get therapy. Yeah, that's a society that women are also trying to dismantle and change. So instead of fighting with women about this, instead of being these fucking pathetic little victims, why don't you actually join in and both agree that mental health treatment is important for everyone? And if you actually you support the same fucking things you guys are fighting, and it's just these men are just so concerned with being the victim, and it drives me fucking crazy. Almost every problem that's whined about by men's rights activists has been happening to women for much longer, on a much greater scale, and a much broader scope, and in much more dangerous ways. And so instead of like joining forces and making the world as a whole a happier and healthier place, they deny the existence of male privilege. They deny toxic masculinity. They're like, what's wrong with masculinity? So they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have all the toxic masculinity stuff. They want to be manly men, but they want to have all the benefits of basically of what feminism promotes and provides. And they just essentially just would rather play the role of the whiniest victims in the fucking world. Men's rights are not at risk, have never been at risk, and there are not. You're not at war. There's nobody at war with men. There are people who are holding men accountable for shitty behavior, and there are women looking to have equality and actual equity with what men have had. And if that feels like oppression to you, if that feels like your life is somehow at risk because of that, you really need to step back and assess it and understand that other people, marginalized, oppressed groups, reaching the same level of you is not oppression. You are not fucking oppressed. Grow the fuck up. So, with that, this is quite an episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We've talked about all 5 steps. Hopefully you take away with that. Talked about why you should just ignore anyone who says that they're men's rights activists or anything along those rights. Please just end the men's rights movement, anything like that. Please just ignore them immediately. Like I just block them all because they have no value in society, and you really don't have any value engaging with them because they're disingenuous. They don't want to have actual discussions. They just want to, jerk themselves off over each other. If you enjoy the podcast, then you can go ahead and support us again, like I said, on Patreon, patreon.com/DKS podcast for $5 a month. I'd love to hear what you think about the episode. You can email me at datingkindofsuckspodcast@gmail.com. You can join our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/DKS podcast. Share your thoughts in there. Of course, if you haven't watched this, you can watch this episode on YouTube at youtube.com/datingkindofsucks. You can follow me on TikTok at Adam Heath and Sarah at simply Sarah G_. And then finally, once again, if you do have questions about anything, if you have questions about this episode that you'd like to ask and like some clarification on, please call the DKS Helpline and leave a message at 407-519-0181. And we will be back next week with a brand new episode. So thank you so much for joining me, and hope to see you, hear from you, whatever, next week.
Whether you're married or single or poly or ace, or hanging out with swingers back at your place, listen to us as we get no fuck on Tinder and Bumble and plenty of yuck, trying and having no luck, because we all know dating kinda sucks. Sarah and Adam are 2 of a kind. He says stupid shit and she doesn't mind. They're not doing this show to make any buck. Life as a chicken whose feathers they pluck. Why does it work? Well, here is the crux. They both know dating kinda sucks. Dating kinda sucks.